Well, thank you for doing this. So I wanted to ask you, development of CanMigo. How did it start? Did you think about these kind of things before modern uh, LLMs? And who did you work with creating it?
Well, our goal at Khan Academy, our mission is free world class education for anyone, anywhere. And if you really think about what we've been doing over the last 15 to 20 years, many folks know that Khan Academy really got started with me tutoring a cousin. Word spreads in my family, free tutoring is going on, and soon I'm tutoring many cousins. But what we've been doing over the years is really trying to scale that type of personalization, that type of mastery learning that traditionally you could only get with tutoring. Now, the tools at our disposal have historically been things like on-demand video, things like personalized software, practice, giving teachers and parents data so that they could personalize more for students. Generative AI, or I would say even AI in general, we have always thought could be a very important part of the solution for, say, maybe making recommendations, et cetera. I had tracked generative AI, things like GPT-1, 2, and 3. They were cool, but I didn't think they were ready for prime time. But when OpenAI reached out and initially showed us and then gave us early access to GPT-4 before the world even knew about things like ChatGPT, that's when we realized that this is a game changer, that this could, we believe, go much further in that dimension of being able to approximate what a human tutor might be able to do, and also be able to support teachers in ways that we never thought possible before, really acting like a teaching assistant, helping them write lesson plans, helping them grade papers, etc.
And what do you like to call these? Is this a teach bot, a tutor bot, a tutoring bot, something else?
The way we've talked about Conmigo is it's a tutor for every student and it's a teaching assistant for every teacher. And we actually think it's really important for it to do both of those things, because in order to be a teaching assistant for a teacher, the AI should have knowledge about the students. It should know what they've been working on, what they're getting wrong, what they're getting right. You wouldn't want a teaching assistant who actually hasn't sat down and talked to the students. If the teaching assistant has acted as a tutor, then it can report back to the teacher. Said, "Hey, I was able to work with Sal on photosynthesis. He has a couple of questions, and then Mary had a little bit of trouble factoring polynomials, which was, by the way, common to a lot of the students. Most of your students are having trouble with finding a thesis statement in writing. That makes you a more useful teaching assistant. So then the teaching assistant say, so how about we make a lesson that covers the following?" And similarly, the tutor, you don't want that to be disconnected from the teacher. You want the ideal tutor is someone who is also connected with your teacher and is maybe your teacher's teaching assistant. So we see these as two sides of the same coin.
And when did you start on Conmigo?
Sam Altman and so we started with Conmigo back in late summer of 2022. Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, two of the founders of OpenAI, reached out to me and said, we have our new model. We think this is going to be exciting for a lot of folks, but it's also going to be maybe scary considering how powerful it is. And we want to launch with some social positive use cases with organizations that people trust, that have the technical capability to take advantage of the technology. And by their own words, Khan Academy was the first organization they thought of. And so we were able to see what would eventually be called GPT-4 well before anyone else did, well before even ChatGPT existed. ChatGPT wasn't even built on GPT-4, it was built on GPT 3.5. And as soon as we saw it and we signed our non-disclosure agreements and we started playing around with it, we realized that, yeah, this is something that we really have to dive deep on. There were a lot of potential rough spots, edge cases that we had to figure out. AIs can hallucinate. They weren't particularly good at math. So we continued to work pretty feverishly on fixing those. But yeah, it was back in summer or fall of 2022.
And given that I assume you needed to work with kids to do this, how did you handle the confidentiality with a group of testers?
Well, the early phases of our development with Conmigo, which is built off of GPT-4, we had very limited usage with kids. We really just wanted to make it kind of work in ways that even as those of us who are the adult testers could feel good that, okay, this is something that we can at least test in front of students. We formally weren't even allowed to launch it before the public release of GPT-4, which was mid-March of 2023. But we did start working with some schools that were very close partners in the February timeframe, February of 2023, to start working on it. And then once we were able to publicly release it in March of 2023, then we did do a much larger scale, more broader partnerships to start to understand, broader pilots to start to understand how this works with real students and real teachers and real public school settings.
And how did you come up with a name?
You know, naming always is a more involved process than most people can imagine. I mean, there were a lot of debates whether it should even have a name or should it just be this thing there. Should it feel like a human, or should it be very clear that it's a robot? You know, there were debates about its gender, or et cetera. And we initially came to the name Companion. And we were going to call it Pan for short. And there were some debates about, the god Pan, whether that's a positive or negative association, et cetera. And then we had actually some of our team members from Latin America say, well, companion in our culture means escort. So we said, okay, we can't name it Companion. And then it was actually our Latin American team members who suggested Conmigo, because it's at least a two-way pun, where conmigo, with me, in Spanish, and in other Latin languages, a similar type of notion, and so that's a play, conmigo. And then also some people have interpreted it as con amigo, which is, I don't think, a bad interpretation either.
Nice. And so as you've started to actually use it, can you talk about current use, numbers, subject, hours it's been used? I mean, how broadly is this used, for what, by whom?
So at the time of us talking right now, it hasn't even been a year that Conmigo's been out. And I actually have been we were bracing ourselves when we launched that, we believe in this. We think there's a lot to benefit, and we just have to be out there to learn from it. But we were very aware of the guardrails or the edge cases, and we put guardrails in place to avoid them. We have a lot of safety mechanisms we put in where we make it transparent to the teacher what's going on. If a student does something shady with the AI will discontinue, and it'll actively notify parents, teachers, administrators. It's not a cheating tool. So we've been thinking about all of these things. But then when you put it out into the field, which it's been less than a year now, and there's been a summer in between, you learn so much more. So the big takeaway we've had is, for students, it really is helping at least a good subset of students engage more than they would have otherwise engaged, getting help when they need it. But we're also learning for another group of students, maybe the broader group of students, that they still need more support on how to use these tools. The tool needs to be more proactive. It can't just be waiting for the student to ask it questions. Some kids are using it well that way, but a lot more students need it to be more proactive. So that's something that we're working very intensely on. On the teacher side, we've gotten very positive feedback that teachers are already saving significant amounts of time as it helps them draft lesson plans, progress reports, even potentially do a first pass at grading, or helping them come up with rubrics for an essay, things like that. And so we are also doubling down on that part. And the ramp up has been faster than I would have predicted this time last year. When we just started in March, April, May of 2023, we started with about 5,000 students and teachers inside of mainstream public schools. Now we are pushing about 60 or 70,000. And it looks like by this coming back to school 2024, it will likely be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of students and teachers using Conmigo as part of their classroom.
And so almost all of it, though, is with a teacher in the classroom rather than truly independent study.
Yeah, for anyone under 18, in order to use Conmigo, it has to be either tied to a classroom teacher account, or it has to be tied to a parent account.
Right.
That's a key guardrail, because otherwise there's no way of making sure that we're keeping it safe, at least for now. I mean, there's some debates whether a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old needs parental oversight for everything they do, but right now we're erring on the side of conservatism.
No, that I've gotten. I did sign my son up, who's 9, and I had to be the main account holder. But what I'm asking really is this mostly in the classroom with a teacher, or how about, like a kid just wants to learn about physics? Do they sort of the way they might watch your videos on their own? I mean, what's the split in terms of like integrated into a classroom versus individualized learning or independent study?
So most of the schools that are piloting it right now, let's call it that 50, 60,000 students and teachers, these are folks who are already using Khan Academy as part of the classroom, usually for math or science, where the teacher is asking students to hit, master this unit by this date, that other unit by that date. And for most of these students, Khanmigo has been a supplement to that experience. So before they had access to videos, solutions, hints, uh, and obviously their peers in the classroom to get support. Now they have all of those, plus they have the AI. With that said, even in these classrooms, there's a lot of activities that we've launched that transcend, say, just traditional math or science help. We have activities that help you think through what you want to do with your life. You have activities you can debate the AI. We have activities where you can have a conversation with an AI simulation of a literary character or a historic figure. And so we are seeing students start to use that stuff, whether or not it's necessarily part of their classroom. Now, one of the points of feedback we got is that's great if a student wants to talk to an AI simulation of George Washington, but it might not be fully appropriate if the teacher's trying to get the student to focus on factoring polynomials. So we have launched something called focus mode, where a teacher can temporarily say, hey, let's just focus on this for now. But we definitely have seen students of a math classroom, science classroom start to explore some of these things in the humanities or career guidance counseling, et cetera.
And have you done any studies yet of efficacy, or it's too early for that?
It's very early, and I think we are instrumenting and starting those efficacy studies right now. And the first place where you're going to see efficacy studies is where we've always had efficacy studies on Khan Academy, where, hey, if a student, we have 50 plus efficacy studies on Khan Academy, and they all point to a narrative of if students are able to put in 30 to 60 minutes a week over the course of the year, roughly 18 hours a year, that these students are growing, depending on the study, you see 25, 30, 40% faster than their peers. So we are very curious, and we have some initial data to show that it's definitely not doing any harm, and we have some initial data that it looks like it's benefiting. Is that helping more students get to that level of engagement / dosage of Khan Academy? Are they getting as many or more skills leveled up on Khan Academy? So we're already looking at those, and those are looking like positive indicators. But I would say, let's say a year from now, we will hopefully have some early studies that even show what happened to students' test scores. At minimum, we want to make sure they don't go down, but ideally they've gone up. And then there's another dimension of efficacy here, another dimension of impact. Obviously, we care deeply about moving students' academic outcomes, but there's also an element here of inspiration, engagement. I don't know. I could suspect that being able to talk to Jay Gatsby or Harriet Tubman could be very inspiring for students. It's a great lesson hook, but it's going to be hard for us to measure the impact of that, at least in the near term. On the teacher side, we have district leaders telling us that they have reason to believe, at least anecdotally, it's already saving their teachers several hours a week per teacher, which once again, that won't affect at least immediately students' test scores, but that's a huge win as well, because teachers are spread thin. They have a lot on their plate. If they could take some of that time back either for themselves or some of that for their students, that's also probably going to be a real big value in the long run, but it's going to be very hard to measure.
And the evaluation function, I mean, is testing going to disappear? I mean, you're already using it for kind of more free-form evaluation of how students are doing, I presume, right? More than a sit-down test. You can.
We are right now on Khanmigo. There's, you can get into a debate with the AI and it'll tell you how you did, that kind of thing. But we aren't using Khanmigo right now for evaluating you deeper. We have an activity where a student can write an essay and Khanmigo will give them feedback on that essay, but that's not like the Khanmigo's given them a grade or saying that you passed this skill yet. We are also using the AI to help give teachers context on the work that students are already doing on Khan Academy. It could be context on the AI work, giving them summaries of what students have been working on, insights based on that. But it also could be the traditional Khan Academy work, but giving them insights in a conversational way. I do think over the next, let's call it a year to two, we will be looking very seriously at the AI initially administering our existing questions. So it's not coming up with the questions, because it can come up with questions, but they have errors in them more often than I think is acceptable. So it might be okay for a student who just wants some practice problems and knowing that they might have errors, but it's not okay if you're actually evaluating someone on whether they have skill mastery on something. And so we can imagine the AI starting to administer items that we create that are human vetted. And we are going to see, are there ways to supplement our existing traditional items that might just be, enter a number or multiple choice. And you do that plus, hey, student, why don't you explain your reasoning? And maybe we can summarize that for the teacher to get extra insight. So we are looking at that, but we want to do it very responsibly.
And I mean, the whole issue of hallucinations and errors. Tell me a little bit how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, that's, you can imagine as amazing as generative AI, especially even a frontier model like GPT-4 is, it has issues with hallucinations and math errors, among many other things, although those are the key ones. We have multiple layers in our product that we think significantly reduce those. One of the biggest levers we have is because we already have so much content. When you anchor the AI on our content, it's much less likely to have a hallucination or make an error. And we're building evaluation tools so that we can measure exactly how frequent these types of error states are and make sure that we're on a trend downwards and that we can be transparent with people about it. But we know that at least with the current generation of model, we're not going to get to perfection. So it's also very, very important to educate people, teachers, students, parents, on where the powers of these tools are, but also where are the edge cases, and how do you recognize those edge cases if they're happening, and then how do you deal with it? But I always point out this is very similar to other tools we have. Doing a web search, it's a great tool. You can look up stuff. The sources you're getting are not always reliable. So you need to have digital literacy to understand what makes a good source versus a not so good source. What's an ethical use of it versus a non-ethical use? What's cheating, what's not cheating? So we want to educate folks on that as well.
And which brings up, are you teaching kind of critical thinking, digital citizenship about how to use the AI? Is that part of the learning in meta about how to work well with an AI?
Yeah, I think the key part of this world we're going into with AI is, yes, you need to make the tools available for folks, and you need to put the right guardrails around it so that it is safe and transparent, especially if you're talking about minors using it. You have to make sure that it's not a cheating tool, that it's pushing people on their own thinking to develop their own critical thinking. And so we're going to, we and others should invest as much as possible in the product to embody all of these values. But at the end of the day, it's also very important to make sure that we're educating the students and the teachers and the parents on where these are powerful, but where are the edge cases? How do you mitigate the edge cases? What's ethical, what's not? And this is what we do. We are known for creating courses to teach people things. So yes, we already have some material, but we're creating a lot more, especially for this coming back to school 2024, to ensure that students and teachers have proper resources. And we're also going out to districts and training teachers, et cetera. So this is a big part of what we're doing now.
And so very briefly, how is Conmigo different from a standard LLM? What did you do that changes it from just standard GPT-4?
So a key question a lot of people might wonder is like, okay, I know ChatGPT, which could be on top of GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. What does Conmigo do that's different? So first and foremost, it is built off of the same underlying model right now. We're using GPT-4 on that same underlying model. But the big difference is ChatGPT really is just a very thin chat interface on top of GPT-4. What Conmigo, so if you're a student, you go there, you use it. First of all, you're not allowed to use it officially if you're under 18 years old. But if a student were to somehow use it, there's no way for a parent or teacher to know what's going on. If a student uses it for inappropriate purposes, there's nothing to stop them. And especially no way to notify the parents or teachers. If a student goes to ChatGPT and asks for answers, it'll just give them answers. And that's before we even think about all the complexities of data privacy and making sure you're all on the up and up on security relative to what you would want in a school environment. What Conmigo does is essentially addresses all of those things where, one, it's not going to cheat for you. It'll act like a good tutor would. It'll say, well, what do you think? Well, okay, well, have you thought about this? But it won't tell you the answer. And it also, all of these other activities that I just talked about, from being able to talk to an AI simulation of a literary figure, talk to Winnie the Pooh, whatever, or being able to get guidance counseling or coaching in some way, or debate the AI. Some of these things you could do on a chat GPT, but you would have to be a very good prompt engineer to set it up yourself to do it, which we know 99% of students are not going to do that. Here, it will just work, and it's pedagogically sound. We have content experts constantly iterating on it. Like our writing tools that we have, we are, this is something that someone would not be able to do on their own, no matter how motivated and knowledgeable they are. Where our writing tool, it highlights parts of someone's passage, and it starts essentially a thread with them about that part, about how they might want to think about it differently. It's kind of like working on a Google Doc with a thoughtful writing coach. And then we're testing that feedback across a whole series of true candle essays that expert humans have given feedback on, to make sure that the AI is actually giving feedback that is legitimate. So the combination of these interfaces where you're co-developing things with the AI, and making sure that the what's happening is pedagogically sound and consistent and strong. The guardrails of being able to make it transparent for parents and teachers, giving the reporting to parents and teachers that whole teaching assistant functionality there, making sure that the data privacy is what you would need for under 18 users. You're not cheating. That kind of just, and I probably listed about 10% of the things that have to go in, all of the layers we put to make the math far better than you would get if you were to just use ChatGPT out of the box, especially the math tutoring. That's what the bulk of district level dashboards. Districts can keep track of what the usage of the AI is in their district. You're not going to get that on something like ChatGPT.
And you trained it on all of your existing material or some portion of them?
So training is interesting. Right now, it's using the underlying GPT-4 model. Because we were working with OpenAI fairly early, we on the margin may have helped influence them a little bit. I think in the early days, we did help them discover some mistakes in the training data. We did help do some fine-tuned training of the broad GPT-4 model, the one that everyone uses. But we, in terms of this particular Khan Academy content, the real stuff that's going on right now is it's anchored on it. It's not trained on it. So it's part of it knows the context as it's having the conversation.
So
in the
that's
future,
guardrails.
Yes, yeah. So in the future, we could do some fine tune training. We're definitely thinking about that, but we haven't done that yet.
And can on the fly personalized materials substitute for pre-made curricula? I mean, do you see this going forward? And now let's talk a little bit moving into the future. Why have a pre-made curriculum or textbook if it can generate one for that particular student, in essence? Is that a direction you're thinking of? Or?
Yeah, when I first saw these, obviously we've put a lot of resources, including myself personally. I personally have made 8,000 videos, and I've been involved with a lot of the other content that we've made over the years. We have 70,000 exercise items, and I was like, oh my God, is all of that is just going to be doable by an AI now? The current generation of AI, even though at first it looks like it can do that stuff, as soon as you try to make it do it, at least things like writing questions or articles, videos, it's not ready for that at all yet. But even writing questions and articles, it looks like it can do it at first. But when you really double click on it, which we've been doing a lot for this past year and a half, it's sometimes missing the mark on the standards. It'll hallucinate. It's going to be making mistakes more frequently than you want. So it can probably be used as a productivity tool for humans who are making content, but you absolutely have to have humans in the loop, and then you want to have it vetted, and then you want to save that content. So you don't want that type of thing necessarily dynamically on the fly, or at least you want the non-dynamic stuff to anchor off of, and then maybe you could have dynamic conversations based on it. Videos, I think we're further out. My gut sense is we every day we see more and more demos of AIs being able to make videos. They haven't made educational videos yet. They've more made like, kind of these 30-second vignette type of videos is what most of us have seen so far. But I think we all think that in a year, 2, 3 years, it will be able to make more substantive videos, potentially videos that have writing in it, potentially videos that feel like a Khan Academy video. I think even then it probably won't be quite as powerful as a video made by an expert who's thought about it, et cetera, who's picked visuals appropriately. But I think in the 5, 10 year time frame, if we're talking about GPT-7 or Google Ultra, Gemini, 9, who knows? Maybe it will be. But I think in the short term, the win is you have high quality vetted human content, and the AI can be a really powerful conversational agent on top of that. And I think there are certain use cases where actually the AI, I wanted to learn about supernovas a little bit. I know a good bit, but I was like, why does it explode? And even if you do a web search, it's hard to find a good answer. And I just went to Conmigo and I said, hey, why does a supernova explode? And it said, well, what do you know about supernovas? Do you know why they happen? I'm like, yeah, I know. A
Mm.
star of a certain mass runs out of fuel. The fusion stops. They're like, okay, so and then what happens? And then I said, well, I think it would just collapse because there's no energy pushing it outward anymore. And it said, well, that intuition is right. And I said, well, then why does it explode? And it's like, well, do you think it collapses fast or slow? I'm like, well, probably fast because it has to be a certain mass and And it's like, well, have you ever seen anything collapse or fall quickly without bouncing? And then I was like, oh, so you mean it collapses so fast at a point it kind of compresses and then bounces and then the outer layers get, jettisoned out into space? And Conmigo said, exactly. And that type of interaction, a video would be nice, but it was pretty powerful for me to have that conversation.
Well, that's truly individualized. Yeah, it's meeting you with what you know and then extrapolating on that. Oh, that's great. Do you see it as and by the way, I mean, I'm talking about Conmigo first and foremost, but I guess the class as well, changing teachers' jobs in the future very much. I mean, I don't think you're going to tell
I
me it's going
think
to put all teachers out of work, but
I definitely don't think it's going to put teachers out of work. I think there are careers in this world that do have to worry about AI. If you're running a call center or you're doing medical transcription, AI is going to hit those things pretty quickly. Arguably, they already have. But if you're talking about something, especially something that's so human centered, like teaching, no, AI isn't going to touch it. And I think it's really going to make it a better job. It's going to make it more interesting, more energizing, more human. Because you just think about the things that a teacher has to do today that are hard. One, there's all this stuff that happens outside of the classroom: creating lessons, grading papers, writing progress reports, writing IEPs. That's not, no one jumps out of bed in the morning and says, oh, I'm going to write an IEP, or I get to write, I get to grade 100 papers on grade expectations written by 7th graders. Like that's no teacher, no human being jumps out of bed for that. They're like, okay, I have to do this because I want to help these students. If we can take that and make that time, if a teacher has to spend 10, 15 hours a week on that type of stuff right now, and if we can make that 2 or 3 hours a week, that's a huge win for education and for teachers and their energy level. And then the other part that's hard for teachers is they know they're in a classroom, 25, 30, 35 students, and they know these kids are all at different levels. Some are ready to move fast. Some are kind of right at grade level. Some need some real help and remediation. But then the teacher says, look, what can I do? I'm one person. There's 30 people, 30 kids in this room. The district or the state has told me this curriculum I have to use, which is one size fits all. I guess I'll just cover it and on the margin try to personalize or try to meet individual students' needs. That's very hard. But if you can get help from technology, including AI, to say, hey, I'm helping support some of these students that you can't get to right now. And by the way, here's some insights. And based on my work, based on the AI's work with the students, how about we modify tomorrow's lesson plan the following way? Or how about instead of having one lesson plan for the whole group, how about you work with a third of the kids who need this for the first 20 minutes, and the other kids the AI can support, and then for the next 20 minutes of class, work with this other group. And so now all of a sudden the teacher has much more supports, and really these two hard parts of the job. There's other hard parts of the job, but they're going to have more support in it. So I think it's really just like having a teaching assistant, which I think would make all teachers and students happier.
I want to ask you a little bit about can we trust AI? So, can you help the general public visitor understand the issue of explainability with today's LLMs and chatbots? Why does it
Yeah,
matter?
I completely understand why people can be afraid of AI. One, we've all seen the dystopian science fiction movies of yeah, of an AI taking over or doing unintended things. And then there's a very real thing of this generation of artificial intelligence. You can't just it's not like you can just open up the code and see, oh, that's why it's doing that thing. You can't say, oh, that's the if statement, the if then statement that's causing it that behavior, because it really in many ways is modeling the human brain, where when people talk parameters, they're the analog of synapses in the human brain. And so there's these massively complicated things. The models are really just a big string of numbers of parameters that are just manipulating the data and then coming up with an answer. So on that level, yes, it's hard to say exactly what it's doing. Now, I will also say that's true of human beings, because we have the same problem. You don't know exactly, it's not like one neuron is for one thing. And so we don't have the technology to do that either. What is interesting though is you can audit AIs in ways that you actually can't audit a human being. So you can create a battery of tests to measure its bias, to measure its inaccuracies in ways that you can't do for a human being. And because it still is a computer, you could do a million tests on it, and you could say, okay, it's performing well here, and here's where it's not performing as well. And so I actually think there's cases where bias is one of the main thing people are worried about, and I am too. But humans are biased as well, and I think it's impossible to have any system free of bias. In fact, there's some biases that are not necessarily negative biases that you actually want baked into a system. But the key is on the negative biases, the ones that you don't want. Can you make sure that it's at least better than the status quo? That's kind of and I think there are ways to test these things and evaluate these things that should give us that type of confidence. So it's prudent to be worried about this question, but I don't think it is an unsolvable question. And I actually think there's ways to solve it that get us way better than the status quo without AI.
And how about dangerous suggestions?
In terms of the AI making a dangerous suggestion or doing something that's very inappropriate, the mainstream large language model creators, there's only about 5, 6, 7, at least in the United States, or that have the resources to do this well. They obviously cared from a self-interested point of view. They care that, like, look, we can't have our AI with tens or hundreds of millions of people use it. We can't have our AI say weird things or inappropriate things. So they are putting a lot of guardrails. Some would argue they're putting too many guardrails to keep the AI from engaging on those things. And of course, Conmigo at our layer, we've added even more guardrails to make sure it's good for students, it's not cheating, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously guardrails where parents and teachers can have transparency. Given that with these mainstream providers, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Khan Academy, I actually think the AI is in that dimension a safer experience than a student, say, doing a web search and finding an article, or being on social media and just whatever's being pumped to them is what they watch. I actually think that's more questions there. I mean, we have to be careful on the AI side, but as a parent, if my child said, I'm going to go spend the next half an hour talking to Conmigo versus I'm going to spend the next half an hour browsing YouTube, I feel much better about the half hour with Conmigo in terms of a safety point of view. Now, where I worry the most, though, is the AIs that are not being controlled by the legitimate organizations. People are open sourcing these models. You could take one of these models and run it off of your own servers. There's no guardrails. You could use those to create deep fakes, to misinformation, et cetera, et cetera. That is what I'm worried about.
And you've mentioned cheating a few times. The how does Conmigo deal with the possibility of cheating?
So, for better or for worse, as soon as ChatGPT came out in 2022, cheating became a big part of the narrative, especially in education. And for good reason, because it can cheat. You can use it to cheat. I'm writing a book about AI in education, not a surprise, called Brave New Words. And one of the chapters is about cheating. And so, the first thing I did is I said, well, what is the state of cheating even before AI came onto the scene? And the reality is it was already pretty bad. There are websites that are happy to write your term paper for you at $5 a page. It's not going to show up by a plagiarism detector because it's literally someone in like Nigeria who is writing a novel paper for you, and they're happy to earn $5 or whatever after the company takes a cut $4 for writing that. There were surveys at places like Stanford and Middlebury College of the number of students who feel comfortable. When I was in college, yeah, we would collaborate on homework, but I would have thought if I had a friend who wanted to cheat on a test, I would think that friend is super shady, and I would not be friends with that person anymore. But the number of students who admit to cheating on a test and almost thinking that it's acceptable now is shockingly high. This is before AI exists. So it's a problem that always existed. AI, if anything, lowered the energy or the cost of doing it. You don't have to pay someone anymore. So now everyone can cheat, like the rich kids. But what I think is interesting is AI can also be part of the solution to not just undermine the AI cheating problem, but to actually undermine the cheating problem as a whole. So let's take writing for an example. What we're doing with Conmigo is a teacher can create an assignment with a writing assignment. They can create a rubric, and then they could say, have my students work on this. The students start working on it with the AI. The AI does not do it for them. It will refuse to do it for them, but it can brainstorm with them. It can give them feedback. Hey, okay, let's work on a thesis statement and help them get there, do outlining, write the essay, give them feedback on the structure and the arguments and all that kind of stuff. And then when the student feels good about it, they can submit it to the teacher. Now, what you're going to get in this world is, in the old world, the teacher would just get the final paper. They really have no idea who wrote that paper. Now they're going to get the final paper. Plus, they're going to be able to have a conversation with the AI, the tutor/teaching assistant, of like, what was the process here? And the AI is going to say, look, here's the paper. But on top of that, I worked with Sal on this for 4 hours. He had a little bit of trouble with the thesis statement initially. We eventually got through that. By the way, here's the whole transcript of our conversation. Here's a summary of our conversation. The AI, feel very confident it's consistent with the other work that he has done for this class, including what he has done in class when he's around you, the teacher. So I feel very confident this is Sal's work. If Sal goes to ChatGPT or one of these websites that get someone, overseas to write your paper for you, or gets their older sister to write their paper for you and copies and pastes it into Conmigo is going to tell the teacher, I didn't work on this paper with Sal. It just kind of showed up. And by the way, it's not consistent with the writing that he's done in class. So it's shady. That addresses not just AI cheating, it addresses cheating as a whole, but even more valuable, it's not just undoing a negative. It's actually an incredible positive where you're going to get support and feedback for students the way they've never gotten. And then teachers are getting way more context and texture than they've gotten before. Before they just got a finished assignment.
That's very interesting. Yeah, you're bringing it into the classroom, not. Mm-hmm. And so what do you see as the greatest potential to benefit society and education from teaching AI?
When I was a kid, and I still sometimes have these daydreams, I think everyone wants to figure out like, hey, there's so many problems in the world. What can I do to help fix these problems? And, whether it's, we could list all the problems in the world. There's wars, there's hunger, there's economic inequality, there's, climate. But even when I was middle school, high school, I started to realize that the ultimate leverage point is what's going on in people's minds. And at the end of the day, that's education. If you can really up-level people to be able to tap into their capabilities, their potential, then in a lot of ways, it can start to solve almost every other issue. By definition, if you can educate more people and educate them better, the number of people who could discover the next cure for cancer or solve the environmental challenge or broker peace in a formerly intractable, part of the world, it's going to increase. You're going to have a better chance of doing that. So I do think at the end of the day, education is, even before we talk about AI, it is always going to be the biggest leverage point, I'm biased, for broad change in whatever problem you're thinking about. And so when the question is about I think it's the same thing: is can we use artificial intelligence to improve human, I don't want to say intelligence, but to improve human potential, to improve human capability. Because if you do that, then there is going to be disruption caused by AI. There are going to be certain careers that are going to go away, and others are going to be created. But the best way we can get people to be able to transition in this new world is if we can use those same tools, use these artificial intelligence tools to provide them this type of support. And these tools are so powerful. I always give this thought experiment. I used to say, even before artificial intelligence, I used to say, if you go back medieval Europe and look at how many people could read, it was like 20%. And I suspect if you went to, say, a member of the clergy, someone who could read, and said, what percent of the population do you think is even capable of reading? They would have said, well, maybe with a great education system, 50%, 60%. Reading was a pretty elite thing at the time. Well, we now know with mass public education, which is a very utopian idea, we just take it for granted now, pretty close to 100%, 99 point something percent of the population is capable of reading. But if I were to ask you today, what percent of the population is capable of understanding quantum physics, or pushing the frontiers on cancer research, or writing the next great novel, or starting the next great business, you'd probably say, yeah, that's sub 5%, maybe with a great education system, 10% of the population. But I actually think now that we have the tools at our disposal and they're accessible, the internet, AI, computing is becoming more and more accessible every day, that we should challenge our own assumptions, what people are capable of, the same way that we would challenge that monk in the 16th century.
And how about around the world and in different language groups? Is Conmigo, for instance, available in other languages? How do you see this scaling working in different countries, different regions?
So we initially launched Conmigo in English in the United States, just because that's where we started the pilots, and that's where we have the most confidence of it's working well. But Conmigo works in multiple languages, as the underlying models work in multiple languages. And obviously, we've also built other localizations just for the interface, et cetera. So we are, over the coming year, going to roll it out into, for lack of a better word, most of the major languages in the world. And try to make it as accessible as possible. Now, the reason why I have to put a little bit of an asterisk on that is there are real costs associated with it. Even before AI, Khan Academy had real costs. Our budget is $70-80 million a year just to do all of the R&D. Just on server costs, we spend about $6 million a year. And that historically has been primarily philanthropically funded. You add generative AI, especially these frontier models, the incremental cost is not nothing. There's a reason why OpenAI will charge you $10-20 a month for a ChatGPT Pro account, because GPT-4 costs a lot of money. But we are looking at ways where we think that cost will come down pretty dramatically, and we've already been doing it on our side. So we think in, let's call it the Western Hemisphere, where you're competing with capacity for, say, with the US, I think we could get the cost down, even with the current technology, down to, let's call it $20 or $30 per year. And then a lot of that capacity can be latent in places like, it's when India needs it, it's not when the US needs it. And so maybe we can even afford to give it even cheaper for an India, a Vietnam, a Philippines that's, on the other side of the planet. I'm hoping we can bring that cost down to, even today, closer to like $5-10 per student per year, which already makes it approachable. And I hope it'll both get better in terms of what it can do, and the cost could even come down from there as the models get more efficient.
And actually, I wasn't going to ask you, but you guys are actually pioneering something here. Is subscription, you have a subscription now, the $4 a month. Do you see that as a significant part of your model going forward?
So what our goal, our mission as an organization is free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Obviously, there's cost associated with doing what we're doing. It's historically been philanthropically supported. Generative AI introduces even another cost. It's very computationally intensive. But one thing that we really want to do is make sure at least teachers have access to these tools, because if they can start to use it, start to save them time, then it's going to really lay nice groundwork for eventual classroom usage as well. And so Conmigo, and we are funding this with philanthropy, is free to teachers. So they can go, get an account, sign up, completely free, no catch to it. What we're giving them is not what you get for free with, say, something like ChatGPT, which is built on GPT 3.5. This is built on the frontier. Khanmigo is built on the frontier models, GPT-4 and other frontier models that we're continuing to explore. And then for students, our primary goal is to work with school districts. We want it to be free to the students. That's our mission. So how do we resource it alongside the school districts so that we can provide it to as many of their students as possible? And then, of course, there are families who want Khanmigo on their own. And so there we do have to charge them, but we are trying to bring down that price as much as possible.
How about privacy and security? I noticed you have the disclaimer that the data you put in is not necessarily private. That's a general problem with chatbots, but what would you say there?
So the data privacy is key, especially because we're dealing with so many schools and we're dealing with under 18 users. What we do is, as the conversations between the student and the AI, first of all, we remove personally identifiable information in the conversation just in case. And also, our contract with the underlying model providers stipulates that they are not allowed to use these conversations for training. So that's how we keep, that's our true north on data privacy. And of course, we do keep the conversations on our side for safety reasons and for reporting. So we can report back to teachers, hey, this is what's going on, to district officials, this is what's going on in your district. And also introduce a sense of memory to a student because it is good for the AI to remember with the student what it worked on with the student yesterday or the week before. So we are working on that type of thing. But in terms of going outside of Khan Academy, it's depersonalized and it's not allowed to be used for training of future models.
And what do you see as the greatest potential harms of generative AI, chatbots, educational AI? And you can answer both more immediate or more apocalyptic.
I think the biggest harms, if I speak very high level, the biggest harm of generative AI, well, if I go beyond education, I think it's going to be fraud, deep fakes, misinformation. And that's already happening, but it's just going to become, you're not going to be able to believe any video you see. You're going to have, it's already happened. There's fraud attacks where something is calling up someone and has the voice of their child saying, hey, mom, I've just got arrested for no reason and I need bail money. Here's the wire transfer. And you're interacting with it like it's your child. It sounds like your child. This has already happened. That's going to happen more. Misinformation in elections, deep fakes. This is all super scary stuff. So that's to me, that's the biggest scary part of it. And also just security breakthrough. As many folks in the security world know, the breakthroughs primarily happen by some type of flaw on the human side of things. Someone getting bamboozled to give their password or to send an email with an attachment on behalf of someone else that they're wrong about. So that's all going to get way more sophisticated, and I'm worried about that. I think the economic dislocation that's going to be happening in some parts of the world, certain careers, I'm not sure, but that's something that we have to pay close attention to. That puts an even double imperative on how do we educate and reskill folks at the same time. And then but in education, very superficially, it's, the fears that people had with ChatGPT around cheating, inappropriate conversations, etc. But as I mentioned, I think those can be very mitigated if you're using a tool that's built for education, as Khanmigo is. And I really do think it's going to be a very clear net positive.
And when AI can do most things people do better than we can, what does the future look like then?
So I think it's a long road before anyone's going to be able to say the statement that AI, let's say AI plus robotics, can do what most people can do better than most people. I think that's, there's been huge leaps in AI in the last couple of years that if you extrapolate them, it feels like in 5, 10, 15 years, we might get there. Although robotics, I hear robotics might be making some leaps similarly in the near frame, but it's not obvious whether it's going to go like this or whether it might asymptote towards that. But let's even imagine a world where You have humanoid robots or even non-humanoid robots, and they're powered with GPT-9, and which has more parameters than there are synapses in the human brain. They have better sensors than our eyes and ears, and a neuron and our nervous system. Um, in that world, I think it's important to view once again these tools as extensions of ourselves, as opposed to something that is in competition with us. There is an analog. Well, okay, we all remember the stories of I forget the name. It was John something, John Brown or John Henry, where there's a competition between a machine to drill a hole through a mountain for a train to pass versus a human being. And I believe the human won, but then dies at the end. I forgot the exact story. It's been like since fourth grade that I heard that story. But the real answer is that that's not the way to look at it. You take the human plus the machine, which is what has happened, and the productivity has just gone up. That machine has become an extension of the human who had to do that job before. And honestly, that human's job has now gotten better, and now they can do more. And so I could imagine a world where the industrial age was an amplification of human beings' ability for our physical capabilities and and how fast we can move ourselves and move information. That was the industrial age. Now it's going to amplify our abilities to construct, create, do things that feel intelligent. But once again, I think it's going to be extensions of our intent. So it will feel like we have powers that we would have, past generations would have ascribed to gods. We see these things where you can write a prompt and all of a sudden a movie gets generated. You can imagine a prompt and all of a sudden you're wearing a headset and a reality gets generated on the fly eventually. But once again, I keep reminding myself it's an extension of human intent. And it's in that way, I can't predict exactly where it's going, but I think as long as we humans are careful about our intent, and we are careful actually about ways that we can unplug ourselves from it and make sure that we are able to engage with the things that truly give us meaning, give us a sense of purpose, a sense of connection with each other, then I think this could be a good thing. But we'll see.
So, and the last question, if you can give me a short answer, but just think about it for a second, which is what is the most important thing for everyone to understand about chatbots? But before that, I wanted to ask you whether you talk about improving the math in Conmigo, but was that you weren't hooking it up to like traditional AI or some separate module that does math better? Because one of our questions I wasn't going to ask you is the way to improve AI to, combine different approaches like symbolic with deep learning. But I mean, if you have an answer you think is important there, that'd be great. Otherwise, we can just go straight to what is the most important thing for everyone to understand about chatbots.
Yeah, I'll answer that first one quick. For us to improve math, we are experimenting with whatever will objectively improve the outcomes. And it's a combination of working with the model providers to improve the underlying models on top of, we do this thing called prompt chaining, where, one prompt can recognize whether math is happening or not, pass it off to another prompt. The other prompt, before even responding to the user, can say, well, what are reasonable responses of the user? Then another prompt can compare that to the user's response and see how they're doing. Another prompt could make a Python call to, if there's any numeric computation to do, to then compare that to what the AI did or what the student did. So we are doing that type of thing and then testing what combination of these is actually improving the outcomes for student interaction. In terms of advice that everyone should know about for artificial intelligence, I think, well, there's a couple of things. I think for everyone, including people like myself who are pretty much in it as our day job, it's important to meditate and to take a breather, because it's happening so fast. It's so tempting to say, I'm falling behind. It becomes stressful. And what's really happening is things are moving fast, but everyone feels that way. I think even the cutting edge researchers at Google and OpenAI and Microsoft, they feel that way, that they're falling behind. So I think there's a breather. There's one thing between the demos that are mind blowing that we're seeing almost on a weekly or daily basis now of new capabilities, but then actually being able to bring that into the world and making it truly useful or productive. So it's not like the world is going to change tomorrow. With that said, it will change because of that demo in the next 2 to 5 years. And the best way to prepare yourself or people you care about or institutions you care about is to engage with it now, deliberately, thoughtfully, not in a panic mode. So people should start engaging. They should start experimenting. If they're in a position to do so, they should start prompting and maybe making applications, figuring out how it can be more useful in their own life. And then that's going to put them in a really good position to help navigate this. I've told many folks, there's all this debate, AI good, AI bad. I do not think it is going to be a flip of a coin. We are actors in this. And what matters is AI is like all technology, it's an extension of human intent. And so if more energy is put by good people with good intent into AI, you're going to have more good outcomes from AI. If more energy is put by bad people with bad intent, with AI, you're going to have more bad outcomes. So it's incumbent upon all of us who at least believe we have good intent to really invest some time here and work on it and ensure that we outrun hopefully a very small minority of the world that might have some bad ideas on how to use the AI.